Hello, and welcome to today's conversation, Customer Experience in the Enterprise. I'm Bennett Richardson, President of Protocol. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our partners at Versapay for making today's event possible. At Protocol, we aim to arm you as decision makers in technology, business, and policy with actionable news and analysis to help you do your job. The mandate is clear. Modern businesses need to provide a seamless, tech-enabled, end-to-end customer experience across their organizations. You need to always be ready, no matter the time nor the platform, to promptly address customer needs and provide a human connection. This requires eliminating silos, increasing automation, increasing analytics, and ensuring that the front end and the back end are aligned to deliver a positive experience for your customers and for your teams. But how do you achieve this in today's digital landscape? In today's event, we'll dive into the tech tools and tricks and real-life strategies that companies are using to build a CX tech ecosystem and prepare for an increasingly customer-first future. We've got a great panel of experts, and I'm excited to bring them up in a moment. We're so glad you could tune in today. If you're not already subscribed, don't forget to sign up for Protocol Enterprise and Protocol's family of newsletters at protocol.com/newsletters. To kick things off, I'm excited to welcome Craig O'Neill for an executive conversation on the sometimes overlooked CX issues happening in the back office. As CEO of Versapay, with over 20 years of experience delivering enterprise software, Craig believes in developing a business strategy focused on optimizing the customer, partner, and employee experience. Welcome, Craig.
It's great to be here, Bennett. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Craig, tell us about yourself and tell us about Versapay and where you all fall into this CX ecosystem.
Yeah, so first of all, the company, we're a fintech company, so we're focused on software and digital payments. We're really aiming to change the way thousands upon thousands of companies do business together by simplifying the transaction process. So that's the process of sending out bills or invoices, collecting payment, and doing all the accounting around that. And we do that by connecting our clients, these are suppliers of all shapes and sizes, to their business customers. I've been with the company for 9 years. I'm a software guy, and that profile, I wish it was only 20 years experience. I'm a little older than that, with more like 30 years now. I should probably update that number. So over those 30 years, the previous 20, I've started and sold a couple of software companies in the wealth management world. And then I made the pivot and moved into the world I'm in now at Versapay, because I really believed in what the company was doing, trying to change how companies did business together. And I thought the time was right to start to modernize what companies call the AR process of billing and collections. 9 years in, I believe that more than ever. We have 8,000 clients. 1 million of their customers are on our platform. So we're touching lots and lots of businesses. We help with over $60 billion of payments. And really, especially since COVID, more and more companies are prioritizing digitizing how they transact together, because they can't depend on checks. They can't depend on people being in offices and doing manual work. So we're really just getting started and having lots of fun.
That's great. That's great. And Craig, as we think about today's topic with customer experience in the enterprise, how do you think about AR and transactions and payments? How does that fit into this CX universe, and how is it often overlooked?
Yeah, well, it's interesting from our vantage point. It's something we focus on. It's what we do. But when we talk to companies, we see them thinking about customer experience as a front office thing and only a front office thing. Kind of makes sense. But the reality is everybody in your business impacts the customer in one way or another, some indirectly, some directly. And the finance department, which of course is thought of as a back office function, and they think of themselves largely as a back office function as well, they actually have direct touch points and very sensitive direct touch points with the customer. So there might be back office, but they affect the customer experience. But that is overlooked by most companies. It's amazing to me how many times we have conversations with companies that are saying, we need to digitize, we need to modernize, we want to improve our working capital and accelerate our cash flow, but they don't think at all about the part that customer experience plays. They just don't give that any consideration. We partner with a company called Wakefield Research and talked to over 1,000 executives, and actually found that when asked the question, about 2/3 of them said, you know what, it makes sense. There is a customer experience element here, but very few do anything about it. So it's very much an overlooked area. And in fact, most think of it as a back office thing. Let's just streamline and automate what we do inside. We're trying to change that. We're trying to help companies realize, no, you should think about the customer first and then work backwards to your own processes.
Got it. And you mentioned streamlining, you mentioned automating. When you're thinking about bringing those that kind of front office CX transformation into the back office? How do you address that with your customers?
Yeah, well, maybe because I came from the outside, it was largely in the wealth management space, and I came to this space and I looked at it and said, well, what are the root causes that hold up payments, that cause delays, that cause friction between businesses? And what I found was what we've taken to calling the AR disconnect. It's a lack of understanding between companies. What is owed and why? I thought I had a credit. I thought I paid that already, but maybe the payment got applied to the wrong bill. It's actually just friction and confusion because they don't share information well, they collaborate well. So we said, hey, what if you could just connect people together and connect their systems together across companies, really kind of taking a page out of the consumer book that so many retailers have done well with their consumer or customer base, share information, create a great self-service environment, let them understand their account and what they've paid and not paid and what's still owing and why. And if there's a problem, make it easy to collaborate and solve problems together. And it's actually a really natural way of working. But because finance has lived in the back office, they don't necessarily think of it right away.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. But before we hand it over to our panel, I would love for you to peer into your crystal ball for us for a second here. When you are thinking about Versapay as well as the industry, what do you think the future holds for CX in the enterprise, and especially as you think about CX innovations in the back office?
Yeah, it's something actually we think a lot about. We believe that the world is moving to a more connected place. And I don't just mean that connected economy as most people talk about it. That's kind of a consumer thing. We're all connected now with each other and with a lot of the businesses that we depend on, but companies getting connected together. That's their people and their systems connecting and collaborating and sharing information. And that's both in the front office and in the back office, in places where it makes sense, like finance. We think this connection will change things for the better. It'll change how companies work together. It'll reduce friction. It'll make companies more efficient. It'll make the lives of the people in those companies better, both the customer, their experience, and the seller, and in our case, the AR department. And so we're trying to help companies embrace this idea. Our part of it we call collaborative AR, but that's really just a step towards the future of what Gartner calls collaborative commerce. We've been borrowing that term because we think it's a good picture for the future. Companies connected together, buyers and sellers working more seamlessly, sharing data, collaborating, and removing all the friction that can be in the supply chain, which we've of course seen a lot of since COVID. And we think that's the future.
That's exciting. It's exciting. And as you know, I think as anyone who's dealt with AR and procurement and payments and transactions, friction is definitely a word that comes to mind, with all of the back and forth, all the information sharing that has to happen in those processes. That's exciting to hear that collaborative commerce trend exploding in the back office and coming into this side of the customer experience. Thank you, Craig, for your time today, and thanks again to Versapay for the partnership.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bennett.
Now we're going to move on to our panel. I'm excited to bring up Aisha Counts, protocol reporter and our moderator for today's conversation, to introduce our speakers and get started. Aisha, over to you.
Thanks, Bennett, and thanks, Craig, for teeing up this conversation. I'm really excited. I've been talking to a lot of people about customer experience over the past several weeks, and we have some customer experience leaders with us here today. So we're in for a great conversation about how customer experience has changed, especially with the pandemic, and then what the future looks like. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. And so, Laura, can we start with you?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Laura Kamey. I'm the Chief Customer and Partner Officer at ServiceNow. So I'm in charge of everything post-sales, as well as our partner ecosystem at ServiceNow. And I play the role of sort of being the conscience of customer experience. I represent that on the C-suite, although I have to say it's really everybody's job.
Thank you. Glenn?
Same title, different company. I'm Glenn Weinstein, the Chief Customer Officer here at Twilio. Twilio is the world's largest communications and customer engagement company. We process more SMS and send more email and do more customer data platforming than just about any company on the planet. And glad to be here, Aisha.
And then Clara.
Hi, I'm Clara Shai. I'm the CEO of Service Cloud at Salesforce. And Service Cloud is the #1 customer service platform and the #1 field service platform. And we connect service from digital to contact centers, to out in the field and in stores. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, thank you all for being here. Let's kind of lay the foundations a little bit. As I've talked to people, there's a lot of different ways that people and companies are thinking about what customer experience means. So how would you define customer experience, and then what does it mean for your business? And whoever wants to jump in can jump in, but I'd love to hear from each of you.
I mean, we're all customers, so it's every touch point. It's the sum total of every touch point we have with the company, and it's not limited to service. It's all of the branding, the marketing, the advertising, the emails that we get, the sales interactions for the companies that have salespeople, service and support. What happens when there's a major incident? And that's why it's so hard, is because it's so expansive. It's hard to get all of that right, both from the customer-facing point of view, but also underneath the hood. How do you connect all of the disparate systems that every company has and drive process automation and AI? I mean, that's really why we're all here, is because it's very hard.
I completely agree, Clara. It's the sum total of interactions, exactly how I would have defined it. I would one thing I would add is I think customer experience is kind of a different dimension, the sum of two different parts. It's knowing your customers and learning about what they do, what they prefer, and then acting on that knowledge by communicating with them in a way that reflects that you know them.
Yeah, and I apparently these people know what they're talking about with customer experience, because I agree with everything that Glenn and Clara have said. And I think the other element that's really important to note is at the end of the day, it is about every single touch point, but it's about a feeling. It's actually a very emotional thing for customers. And it's that feeling that sticks with folks that drives loyalty, a general perception of a brand overall based on all of those interactions and the feeling they have, right? And that makes them either great customers or not great customers. It makes them shout out the top of mountains and talk about your brand and be great promoters, or they could be great detractors. So that emotional part, I think, is really, really important to remember.
Has that definition shifted? I mean, each of you touched on, right, it's every interaction. It's not just support, which I think has maybe generally been the conception. Has that definition of customer experience shifted, and then what has led to that shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this earlier, but if the very beginning days of customer experience, it was really actually trying to measure customer experience. So a lot of post-call surveys and net promoter surveys, and that was what was called customer experience. If you think about it, that's not actually customer experience. It's at best, measuring, a part of customer experience. And so as we've taken a step back and looked at, based on the definition that we all just aligned on, it's, how do you really stitch together this cohesive, holistic set of interactions across marketing, across commerce, again, in-store, as well as e-commerce and mobile commerce, across sales teams, across service. And of course, service isn't just your support team. It's your first and second and third line. It's your customer success managers. It's professional services. It's the entire account team. If you're in a B2B scenario, how do you bring all of those people together to really collaborate around a single view of the customer so that you can deliver that cohesive experience? So I think that's where we are right now, is we've really evolved, to your point, from that very narrow view to really recognizing, gosh, this is hard. I have to integrate across multiple systems. I have to automate across multiple systems with RPA and with AI and with process automation. Oh, and by the way, in today's labor shortage, I can't find enough developers. And so I have to offer both code options as well as no code declarative options so that my business analysts who are closest to the problem can drive that automation.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. The one thing I would say, I guess, to your question around how has it changed over time, I think what's really interesting, because we're talking about enterprise, customer experience today. I think that what's really evolved is our expectations of what a great experience is have actually been set in our consumer lives. Because at the end of the day, B2B, B2C, it's just business to humans. We're all people, and it's about, again, to hit that emotional connection. It's about how a human feels. And so I think this notion of, what we've come to expect, on these devices, and you want simple, you want easy, you want intuitive, you want valuable. It has to be one click. The notion of how do we take friction out of this process and create more consumer grade experiences in the enterprise, regardless of the role that you play. If you're interacting with our company, how should that feel to you? And I think that's an evolution that, in addition to what Claire spoke about, I think that's a big differentiator as well.
Those are fantastic points. Totally agree again. Let me just add another quick thought. I think that there are a couple of things that are really changing in the last few years, specifically from customer perspective. One of them is the need for data privacy. Consumers are saying it, regulators are saying it, governments are saying it. Consumers are getting a lot more skeptical about how their data is being used. And that really leads to another trend I think we're seeing in spades now, which is a desire to have a more direct relationship with customers and not allowing that to be intermediated or aggregated. In part, it's kind of the same trends. Most browser manufacturers have gotten away from third-party cookies and forcing vendors to gather data about their customers gather first-party data that are related directly to your relationship with that brand. I saw a tweet the other day that had a picture of Ralph Lauren clothing in a department store in a big messy pile. And then in the right side of the photo was a picture of the Ralph Lauren flagship store in Los Angeles, and how it's presented exactly the way the brand wants it to be presented. So I think moving to direct relationships is a real trend we're seeing right now.
Yeah, let's touch more about that. I mean, one of the things I've seen is a rise in customer data platforms, or just ways of organizing your data around a customer. Why is that important? Talk to me more about personalization and customer expectations with that.
Well, it really comes down to that single source of truth. I mean, I'll just share an example with you. IKEA, of course, we're all familiar with the global furniture company. They've had a customer experience intention for many years, but what they realized was that what was happening in store and how we experienced the merchandising and the warehouse in store, that wasn't necessarily translating to other channels. And during the pandemic, like a lot of retailers, a lot of their sales moved to e-commerce and mobile commerce. And so what we did together, I mean, really kudos to their leadership, was to say, how do we want to present, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's on IKEA.com or whether it's through IKEA, their mobile app. And then what about when you order new kitchen cabinets and you actually have an IKEA technician come to your home? How do we make that a manifestation of the brand that's intentional, right? Not just checking the boxes and getting the job done, but really thinking holistically about how do I want to delight this customer and ensure loyalty with my brand over the long term. And so it just, again, thinking about all of those touch points, starting with the customer expectation in mind, or the aspirational customer expectation in mind, and working backwards to make sure that all of the systems, right, the people who drive out to your home to install the cabinets, they might be on a different system. They're offline for much of the day on their mobile. And so it's a different set of technologies that all have to stitch together to create that experience, that magic.
That's a great example, Clara, because IKEA has such a strong brand identity in their stores, and I can see the need to be intentional about that outside of the stores. I was going to add, Aisha, that customer data platforms to me it's a big fancy term for know your customer in a personalized way. In a pre-technology era, when you went into a store, it was probably a local store. The shopkeeper probably knew you, probably had seen you for years, knows your preferences, can kind of anticipate your needs, but open to potentially seeing those needs change. And the first generation of technology, let's say, last 20 years or so, we've gotten away from that. We've gotten away from that level of personalization of just know me in a courtesy sort of a way, not in a data mine me to death sort of way, but just basic courtesy. And I think CDPs are allowing brands and companies to get back to that. Just treat me like I've been here before. Don't treat me like a stranger every time.
What are some of the barriers you see to providing a good customer experience? We can start on the technology end. Is it the cost of some of the tools? Is it integration challenges? I think, as Claire was alluding to, what are some of the barriers to actually providing that good, end customer experience?
I think it really is, just to expound on the integration point, different departments have grown up with different technologies and also different technology vendors. And so just to give an example, right, if there's something that goes wrong with your kitchen cabinet installation, or your person never shows up, or there's some sort of issue, there's an outage, you're trying to buy something on an e-commerce site, think about that experience in commerce and in service, right? The person's on the phone, waiting on hold, waiting to talk to somebody. And then the marketing team in most companies has no idea. And so their email campaigns are still going. And so imagine, going back to Laura's point about feeling and emotion, how does that customer feel when they're so frustrated that their air conditioner unit hasn't arrived, it's sweltering hot in Texas, and then they're getting marketing campaign emails from that same company? It's infuriating, right? And yet that's the reality for most companies today, not because anybody wants to, of course not. It's really, it speaks to the challenge of the silos and the need to both have the technology integrated and the workflow be able to move across organizations, but also the need for collaboration. And, we see this even internally in our company, having Slack join Salesforce, the Salesforce family. It's changed how we work, right? To really remove those silos and let different people from different departments actually talk to each other.
I'll give it a more basic example, which is just communications is hard. The last mile of customer experience is the actual communication that you have to a customer and from a customer. Doing that at scale, getting your emails delivered to an inbox is hard. Getting your messages transmitted globally in a timely fashion is tricky. It's all easy at small scale, and it gets really hard at large scale. And to this day, and think of how many companies just botch their IVR. They just drop calls. Things just don't work properly. Communication is that last mile. And I forgot whether it was you, Laura, or Clara, who said, tone of communications is important. And if you feel like you've been passed around and nobody cares, even if you get communicated the right information, you don't feel good about the interaction. So just getting the basics right is surprisingly still pretty hard today.
Yeah, I think all of that is incredibly true. I can't, emphasize enough the cross-functional nature that Clara's mentioned a few times is so critical in getting those, if you have a problem, you actually want to get the problem fixed. It doesn't, you don't just want to call into a call center and have a nice person talk to you, right? You would actually want to have those things fixed, and you want it fixed rapidly. That to me is a huge part of it. And there's a lot of complication in doing that. But then the unlock is, okay, how can I then take that data, take those connection points, and predict problems so I can proactively resolve them for other customers so they don't have to call me. So I can say, you know what? And those are the moments that you can delight customers, right? To Glenn's point, if you can communicate that effectively and say, we noticed this situation, we proactively fix this for you. This is what you should see. Or maybe you don't have to communicate that at all because you anticipated it enough. Those are using all of those hard connections, that communication point, all of the stuff that Glenn and Clara have talked about, to then be able to find moments of delight. I think that's where folks can differentiate their brands.
And what are some of the challenges with doing all of this, everything we talked about, right? Integrating systems, breaking down silos. How do you do that in a remote or hybrid environment? I mean, that's something that we saw, right, with the onset of the pandemic, was you're scrambling to provide this good experience, but then maybe on the back end, you're struggling to even get your own infrastructure up and to be prepared for a digital first world. So how do you think about that in a remote or hybrid environment?
Well, first of all, I think all of us are probably experiencing that you do need to bring people together. Right? Dreamforce is this week, and there's a reason why tens of thousands of people are flying in this very moment. Doesn't have to be every day, but we do have to bring people together. We have to spend time with our customers. We have to spend time with each other. Now, in between, we all know that there's no going back to how things were before the pandemic. And again, I mean, just me personally, I wasn't a Slack user before, and it's just been incredible just how just little things that you would normally do when you're sitting next to somebody in the office or walking the halls that you just can't when you're remote, and how important that is, and how seconds matter, minutes matter when you're trying to get something done and you're blocked on a piece of information or you need a file. And so I think we're all still learning, but I'd say early days, but there's promise in terms of how technology can really help change how we work together and emulate more of the real time that we used to have day to day.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely important. The human part to build those trusts, those connections is really critical, and having the right technology tools to work remotely. But I would say, like, the bigger challenge that I think is a super important underpinning if you want to drive a customer experience transformation at your company is getting the culture right. And you have to think about making customer centricity central to your culture. And I love the conversation that we had with Craig at the beginning of this, because he talked about how every employee's job is about influencing the customer experience, whether it's back office, whether you're a customer facing function, et cetera. And so that notion of creating a cultural mandate, but then like creating the grassroots culture to actually drive that and make it sort of everybody's mission, that to me is the thing that is really critical in a hybrid world, where you take those moments of togetherness, you reinforce culture, and then you can unleash that and let those kind of weeks that you're not together, or whatever the time frame is, really be incredibly productive, because everybody's aligned around a larger mission, in a singular culture.
A lot of companies talk about, right, putting customers at the center. And you touched on this a little bit, Laura, but what does that actually mean? What does that look like? Is it breaking down silos between marketing, sales, and service? Is it having more chief customer officers like you two, like you and Laura and Glenn? Like, what does it actually take to really put customers at the center and make that a culture that is embedded throughout an organization?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I'll start with this, which is I really think it has to be intentional. And you think about the companies that are really incredible at customer experience, and you ask people, and most of them will talk about consumer brands. I'll tell a story about Disney. There's this sort of Disney legend, I guess, that is like, there's a group of an executive speaking to a bunch of new hires, and they say, tell me who in this group is in janitorial. And of the hundreds of people, 5 people, raise their hand, I'm in janitorial. And he says again, who in this company is in janitorial? And the same 5 people raise their hands. And it's like, no, every single one of us is in janitorial. We don't walk past problems at this company. We're all about creating an amazing experience. And so to me, like it really, this cultural moment and building that into kind of your employee journey is like a incredibly important differentiator. And so how can you be intentional about that? And of course, it's about reinforcing culture. We use a word, wow our customers. I'm on the board of Confluent, and they have a cultural phrase called customer love is a cultural value. And so those emotive words and reinforcing that across your employee journey is really important, because we know that customer experience and employee experience, like these things are, like they can create a virtuous cycle. They're mutually reinforcing. And so how can you align that amazing, value of creating this incredible customer experience? Like that gives employees purpose, and so how do you really make that part of who you are in your DNA of your company? That to me is the magic.
I agree completely on the importance of culture. And then I would say the next step after that is oftentimes it's not that employees don't want to delight the customer. It's that they might not know what that means. And they might not all be aware of where the customer frustration is emerging. And so, I mean, spending time with customers is critical, really shadowing them, talking to them, not just the executives, but people on the front lines. And beyond that, just really thinking about how what's the journey? And for us at Salesforce, something that's been really helpful, and our customers have given us feedback that they've really appreciated, is bringing an industry-specific lens to those customer outcomes, right? Because retail is different than automotive, and manufacturing is different than financial services, is different than life sciences. And even within one of those industries, like financial services, commercial banking is very different than auto insurance. And so getting very specific in terms of driving those customer journeys and outcomes, so that you have a very clear and concrete set of milestones to guide employees, right? It's everyone's job, but now they know what their jobs are. And those milestones are really mapped back to the end customer's jobs to be done. For financial services, it might be things like saving for college, saving for retirement, saving to be able to buy a house, getting very concrete, right? Emotion is important, but we got to go beyond that to say, how are we going to actually deliver these outcomes that are so important to our end customers? And how do we guide them across every marketing interaction, every service interaction, every sales interaction, every commerce interaction to be able to do that?
I love both of those answers. I'm in janitorial. I'm going to say that from now on. Good story, Laura. I'm thinking, Aisha, about your question, which was, what does it mean to be customer centric? And I'll throw out another perspective, which is that really every communication, every interaction you have should be personalized. I think it's that simple. Not to use the cliched airline example here, we're all frequent flyers probably, but Delta Airlines recently started giving you a push notification when it was time for your flight to board. That's good. That is giving you information that you could use. Then they made that better by personalizing it to, it's your zone's time to board. You think about any SMS message, any email, any phone call your company is making. If you're sending the same message to every customer, you're probably not doing it right. There's got to be something you can do to personalize that communication and make it feel like a one-to-one interaction.
I want to second what Glenn just said. I mean, automation is critical, right? Especially in these times, every CFO is scrutinizing spend and we have to focus on ROI. But automation without personalization, it's annoying, right? It's often worse than no automation. And so bringing in a true view of that customer across all of their 360-degree set of interactions is critical. And again, goes back to that sum total of customer experience that we started the conversation with.
I love that. You're right. Automation without personalization is annoying. That's a great way to put it. It's like RoboCop just coming after you. We have the ability to overwhelm you with messages. We know that. But Twilio doesn't want to send 10 times as many SMS messages next year than we did this year. We just want to send better messages and more personalized messages.
How are you measuring the effectiveness of like some of your customer engagements and interactions? I know earlier in the call, we sort of talked about NPS and CSAT and some of these traditional metrics, but how do you actually think about, okay, we know we delivered a good customer experience because of what? How do you measure that?
I think this is evolving too, right? Traditionally, customer support looked at average handle time and first call resolution and CSAT, those metrics that you just mentioned. Those are still very important day to day just to make sure that the operations are sound. But more and more, companies like Southwest and Marriott and IKEA, Uber Eats, they're saying, wait a minute, I want to optimize for today, but really I want to optimize for the customer lifetime. And if I spend longer with a customer and it's not the fastest handle time, but I'm able to win them over as a brand loyalist and upsell them on 2 products that they didn't own, that's a huge win. Not just for support, it's a huge win for the entire company.
This always drove me crazy as a support professional, this obsession with call avoidance. When in other parts of the business, like marketing, you're doing anything you can to draw customers to interact with you. And then in the call center, suddenly we're supposed to avoid those contacts. So I agree 100%, Claire. That's a great point.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'd add, because having listening posts is super important. If you don't measure it, you don't understand it. But the qualitative work that is aligned with the listening posts is super important. So there's feedback usually associated with those. And then there's also tools like journey mapping and really diving deep to understand that customer experience. And that to me is where you really understand where those pain points are, where the frustration moments are, et cetera. And that's where, the insights into action, taking a workflow, making sure you're driving a closed loop process, like whatever it is that then takes that insight and does something about it. That's when you can unlock that. And that, again, going back to the culture, if you can build that into your culture so that folks look at the customer feedback whenever they're trying to reimagine something or improve something or whatever, and then take action around that's where I think that's what really matters and what the best companies are trying to do.
I want to suggest two specific metrics that I think apply to all the groups that we're talking about today: marketing, support, sales, which is the old SaaS metrics: customer acquisition costs and lifetime value. Lower your acquisition costs, increase your lifetime value, you're doing it right. Support people have not historically thought in terms of those two metrics, but I think they actually really resonate when you introduce them. Those are the two ultimate metrics to business success.
Yeah, I mean, those are the lagging metrics that frankly matter for your shareholders, for all of us. And that to me is, that's what we know is correlated. Great customer experience leads to companies winning because it leads to those better outcome metrics at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, because it's a long-term view versus a short-term view.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and I imagine that view has shifted as well. And with that, how important is it that customer experience, or just thinking about customer experience, is something that is happening in the C-suite? I mean, we have two chief customer officers. I see kind of more of those roles emerging, but why is it so important that it actually sits in the C-suite and it's a conversation that's happening at the highest levels?
Yeah, well, I guess I have a point of view on this, which is so it is a new role. It's a role that's emerging, and it means different things. It means different things at a retailer than it means for a software company. And even within software companies, the role actually means different things, But I think that's the really interesting and exciting part. It's the CFO role has been around together, and it's been around forever, and it's pretty well defined. This is a role that's still emerging, and it's one that I think is super critical. And to me, what's really important is that it becomes a C-level conversation. And the most successful kind of CX leaders actually have a CEO that takes that on as a personal priority and makes that one of the top company priorities, and can cascade that down, because you won't be as successful if it's just one person's role. It really needs to be owned across the C-suite, and it sort of needs to be everybody's mandate. One person can kind of champion how that rolls out across the company, which is what I try to do at ServiceNow. But it has to be every single function. Again, that's incredibly important, I think, to really make a difference here.
Let me bring a military analogy to bear here. I think having one person ultimately responsible for an aspect of the business just helps organize everyone's thoughts, kind of like a clear chain of command. I find, as wearing the title Chief Customer Officer around Twilio, like people come to me, people at Twilio, and nudge me and say, "Hey, Glenn, are you going to do something about that? That's not very customer centric." Like, well, you could have done that too, but just having one person with that title to just always champion the interest of the customers, it helps organize people's thoughts and keep the company truly focused on what's important for the long term. It is easy to make decisions in the short term that sacrifice your customer experience, but it doesn't turn out well if you do too many of those.
And that role can, to Laura's point, manifest in different specific titles. But as Laura and Glenn mentioned, having someone who thinks about this and obsesses about it every day, all the time, and nothing else is critical, because this is hard. We just spent this whole session talking about all of the pitfalls and how hard it is. And so having someone and having a team focused on prioritizing the work streams is critical. And then, because it is so expansive, you're going to have to move a lot of people's cheese, right? You have to change how people work and set the tone for the culture, as we talked about earlier. And so having someone who's at that level, who has the credibility to partner with all of the departments and functions and businesses to actually change how they work and the metrics that they're used to using to operate, that takes a really real seniority. And it's certainly it's a board conversation. And I know some of us are on boards too. So I think it's absolutely critical, and we're seeing so many companies move in this direction.
Credibility is a really key term there, Clara, because often you're finding yourselves telling other leaders you need to spend more money or you need to slow down your roadmap, and there are going to be short-term costs with that, and it takes a lot of credibility to influence people in that respect.
I want to talk about some of the emerging technologies that are influencing customer experience, and so I'm going to go through a list of them, but I'm going to start with one, and then I'd love to hear whoever has thoughts on kind of the maturity of adoption of this technology, or what role you think it will play. So I want to start with what people are calling emotion or sentiment analysis. What are your thoughts on that as it pertains to customer experience?
Again, it's really reading all of what a customer has to say. And what a customer has to say isn't just what they type, it isn't just what they tweet, it isn't just what they say, but it's actually how they say it in context of what's happening with that customer, right? Is there an outage? Is their delivery delayed by 6 months? Is the package that they received totally broken? And so it's really important. And we've introduced that with Service Cloud Voice, and we're deploying this across contact centers around the world. And it's just been fascinating how much you can pick up about what's really going on in a conversation, right? Almost to the point where I don't need to send them the survey afterwards because I know how it went based on not just their words, but how they said it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this is, again, going back to the notion that that customer experience is emotional. It's in those high emotive moments. Maybe it's something's really gone wrong, or maybe it's a joyful moment that really matters in your life. It's it's your wedding or the birth of a child or something. I think understanding that in highly emotional times, like if I spend a lot of time actually asking our employees and talking to customers about, like, tell me, an experience as a customer that really mattered. The ones that they remember are the things that something terrible was happening, and then a company went out of its way to do something unexpected that made the situation a little bit better, And to me, like my mom tells me a story about, like, when her dog died and she was canceling her, subscription to her dog's medication on Chewy, and they sent her flowers, like, talk about cementing loyalty, right? It's like, whether that sentiment analysis or just putting in, like Clara said, the context of everything that's going on and figuring out what the emotion is behind that's your opportunity, because those are the real loyalty moments.
What about virtual reality and augmented reality? How do you see that playing out in customer experience?
Well, I'm going to jump in because this one is really exciting. I feel like in field service, there's the aging of the workforce matters, is a big deal. It is actually, we talk about C-suite topics, like that is a C-suite topic for folks who have a big, field service operation. And so how do you do a better job, helping them understand how do you fix a giant piece of equipment out in the field when maybe you do and maybe you don't have connectivity. Like the role of AR, VR is so critical, because you can upskill a workforce that, frankly, you're in the talent wars, you're just not going to be able to have that same level of human who has all of that awareness. Leveraging this technology, especially in the field, to be able to deliver on whatever it is you need to do, that to me is incredible, and it's really timely given what's happening right now in with the talent wars.
We see that exact same thing. In the beginning during COVID, it was really a lot of customers didn't feel comfortable having a field service technician come in their home. There just wasn't a lot of science about how COVID was transmitted, and so we had companies like GE Appliances, right? Someone buys a smart refrigerator from them or dishwasher, and it breaks down and literally didn't know what to do. And we really had to put our heads together and adopt this, virtual remote assistance. And we came up with this together where, everyone, as Laura said, everyone's got one of these. And so the customer can point their phone at the refrigerator, and then in real time, a technician in the contact center or working from home can use AR to kind of circle, it's this button, hold it down for 30 seconds and then wait. And then the technician can see in real time through video whether it's working or not. And that behavior has actually just stuck, right? Because customers are like, oh, this is great. I'm no longer scared of inviting people in my home, but it's just inconvenient for me. And so that's what a lot of customers are opting in for. And on the company side, it's great because, to Laura's point, they can't hire enough field service technicians and they want to be able to scale. And by the way, a truck roll is extremely costly for these companies. And so for them to be able to offload this to a contact center or even completely DIY through self-service, that is a huge cost savings in today's economy.
Let's talk a little bit more about self-service. What are you seeing in terms of things like chatbots and then moving towards virtual agents? Like, how do you see those technologies playing out?
Those are two examples of the many channels that customers want to communicate with you on. And I think the real takeaway there is to make sure you've got a multi-channel strategy specifically that allows a customer to have a single conversation with you that jumps channels. I think we started out thinking, well, there's a path you should take. You should start with the chatbot, and then if the chatbot can't answer your questions, you drop to a knowledge base and eventually to an agent. But a better way to think of it might be just engage with each customer on the channel that they want to be engaged with at that moment. We're mostly techies here. We don't like speaking to humans, so we think the right answer is always, just put it in a knowledge base and let me look it up. But most people are not like that. Most people not only don't want to read it, they prefer seeing a video where someone explains it to you. To me, that's like an alien concept. But a lot of people prefer watching a YouTube or a TikTok video to reading a paragraph. So it's understanding your audience has a vast array of channel preferences. And the best thing you can do is they hit you on SMS, pick it up over chat. They hit you over chat, pick it up over email. They're getting frustrated, convert it quickly to a voice call, and just be able to just be really agile about what channel you're communicating on.
Yeah, having that omni-channel strategy we've seen is critical. And then also, to Laura's point earlier, learning over time which types of workflows and which types of actions different types of customers might prefer to do on which channels, right? Because, for me, for example, I usually like SMS, but there are moments like if there's an insurance claim when I don't want to text, I want to talk to somebody, I'm frantic, or I need advice, I want to be on video. And so just recognizing the complexity and the nuances based on the type of interaction is really important. And so one thing for us too is just in all of the learning we've been able to do with our, we call it Einstein conversation mining, right? It's sentiment analysis, but it's also understanding why customers are calling into the contact center and being able to use AI to classify those different call types and say, wait a minute, actually for most customers, for change of address, they don't want to call in, right? They don't want to email. They just want to be able to work with a bot and making that bot available on Apple Business Messenger and Facebook Messenger and SMS, right? Giving them that choice to do that. And then conversely, for those other actions that are more complex or more big life moments, recognizing that's the last, like chat is the last thing that a customer wants to do to talk about that.
Yeah, it's a great example of something that when you do it right, it looks easy. And the consumer says, oh, it was so easy. It's actually pretty hard to do that on the back end. Make it easy and put in the hard work to make it easy.
What makes it challenging on the back end? Is it, I want to kind of unpack that a little bit more.
Well, I think there's a tendency to try to kind of oversimplify and overclassify who your customers are and what their personas are. It goes back to the assumptions I was saying earlier. As a techie, I just assume people don't want to speak to humans, but that's not the case. So challenging your assumptions and thinking pretty broadly about, well, I don't know how consumers are going to interact with us. And the same consumer, Clara, your example is great. The same consumer, depending on the context, is going to act in a very different way with us. So we have to be really open-minded and flexible in how we think about that. That's just hard for product managers to do. They tend to go to defined paths, and we have to kind of constantly remind people in those decision making positions. Don't constrain your consumer. Let them go where they're going to go.
Well, it's hard on the consumer side, to Glenn's point. It's also hard often on the back end process side, right? If you're wondering where your outdoor furniture set is that you ordered 3 months ago, like there's probably a lot going on, right? There's manufacturing hiring shortages, so there's production delays. The product that does get built, there's not enough ocean freight capacity, right? Ever since the Panama Canal incident. And then once it gets there, there's not enough truck drivers to hire to get the product from the dock over to the warehouse distribution center. I mean, your customer has no idea, they're just mad. And so connecting these dots, and again, the ocean freight company, they're using a different technology stack than your truck drivers usually. And so how do you get everybody really aligned and working off of a single source of truth about what's happening with that product, as well as what's happening with that customer?
We've touched on this throughout our conversation today, but what role does artificial intelligence play? How do you see AI being used?
To me, AI has two really great promises. One is to make human workers better, right? They could be like us using Siri or Alexa or Google autocorrect or iMessage autocorrect. It's also for contact center agents and field service drivers, so to find the right route based on real-time traffic conditions, or if there's a natural disaster happening, avoiding those routes. And so I see this play out, the highest impact I've seen has really been in the contact center, taking all of those mundane tasks, those rote reasons why customers call, which are both a source of customer frustration, but also a huge source of agent frustration, and offloading those to self-service, to bots over the customers.
I think when you say AI,
Sorry,
yeah, I didn't mean to step on you.
no problem.
I was going to add, I think when you say AI, Aisha, I actually think more about machine learning and the opportunity that we tech vendors have and the obligation we have to use the millions and billions and trillions of data points that we're getting to make our services better. Clara, you mentioned ways that AI manifests itself directly to the consumer in the form of autocorrect, and those are super valuable. But there's also this fact that we live in a dangerous world, a world filled with spam and misinformation, and every way that we have to interact with our customers is in a way threatened by bad behavior and bad actors. And it's up to us to use the power of machine learning to basically do as good a job on our processes as Google has done with Gmail, where they've sort of eliminated spam as an issue. For the most part, if you use Gmail, you don't really think about it too much. They've covered that for you. We as tech vendors have the same interactions with our consumers safe and wanted, and something that they look forward to. And machine learning is really the only possible way to do that at our scale.
Yeah, I totally agree, Glenn. I mean, I think it's super important, because at the end of the day, whether you end up being proactive with your customers, anticipating issues, avoiding risk, whatever it is, the data is unlocking that. But I also think kind of where Clara started is machines are great at helping do rote tests, which allows the employee, the humans, to actually focus on stuff that only humans can do, the stuff that's more meaningful for them, that's higher value. That unlocks time for them to actually create those better experiences. So I just think it's helpful both on the employee side and on the customer side.
One thing I've heard talked about is like the 3 Ps, right? Proactive, preventative, and predictive. And we kind of touched on this as we talked about AI and some of these other technologies, but how do you think about those things and making sure, and also personalized, maybe it's the 4th piece. So personalized, proactive, predictive, and then preventative. How do you think about those things?
It's a lot of
those are the buzzwords in our world right now. I'm sure we can all come up with examples, but I'll just share one. I got an alert. I guess those of us who live in the Bay Area got a proactive, preventive alert last week that the power grid was starting to feel near capacity, encouraging us to turn off any high electricity consuming appliances, right? Which I'm sure lots of people did, right? So that we could not have a blackout. And so I think that manifesting across every area of our life is so important. And now we have the data to be able to do that, right? To be able to make sense of this. And how much worse would it be if they weren't able to be proactive and we couldn't prevent this from happening? And then all of a sudden, all of our schools are shut down and all of our traffic lights aren't working. And so, I mean, that's just one example, but across every area of our life, being able to take knowledge about what we do know to proactively anticipate what the customer need might be.
I want to end on this. What is one sort of either technology or trend that you think is going to have the greatest impact on customer experience in the next several years?
I said it earlier, but I'll reiterate it. First-party data. Google Chrome is getting rid of third-party cookies in 2024. This whole notion that you can build a customer profile by watching what websites they visited before they came to yours is an antiquated notion. Customers don't appreciate it, and pretty soon you're not going to be able to do that. So forming a direct relationship with your customer is going to require a whole different set of skills. And frankly, I don't think companies are ready. I think habits of the past 10 to 15 years of relying so heavily on third-party marketing data for customer profiles, there's a lot of work to be done between now and 2024 to adjust to a first-party data world.
Yeah, I mean, certainly data, right? Data is going to make a huge difference as we think about unlocking all of the technologies we've talked about today to create better, more proactive, more predictive experiences that can ultimately delight a customer. But I think increasingly, you know, what Claire talked about, this notion of connecting not just what we're doing in the front office with our customers, but throughout the whole enterprise, the middle office, the back office, and that work is hard, connecting legacy systems, connecting multiple departments. How do you create a new standard around that and make that the status quo? Because, you know, not enough customers are there yet. They've thought about this thing not as a holistic journey, but really as the, you know, a partial journey as I think about customer experience. That to me actually is the hard work that will unlock better experiences across the enterprise.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's getting back to the basics of having a single source of truth. Easy to say, really hard to execute on. And once everyone in a company, every employee, every department can operate on that single source of truth about where the customer is today and anticipate where we want the customer to go next or where the customer wants to go next, then, I mean, everything else is easy, right? Because everyone will know how to play their part in making that happen.
Well, thank you to all of you, our panelists, for joining and for the conversation, for sharing your insights with our audience. I really enjoyed it. Of course, thank you to everyone who tuned in. And then again, thank you to our sponsor as well. Hope you all have a good one. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.